Yo, I had a what up, y'all? I had a mishap. My internet crashed. I was trying to post a link and I had a lot of programs open. So my internet, my computer, it wasn't my internet, it was my laptop. I need to go ahead and upgrade my laptop. This shit old. I've been having this shit for too long. Time to get rid of this old motherfucker. It's work. It um so I guess that's all I can ask for. That's all I can ask for. Um, Hold up. Let me try to do this the correct way so I don't have those mishaps. Let me make sure I do this the correct way. All right. Um, Minimize that. Close that down. Close that out. Yeah, because that was crazy. But yeah, it's been a lot of shit talking going on. There's been a lot of people in back chats talking shit, acting like they smart, acting like they got all the information and all that. So all I do is I challenge you. Um, I ask some questions that I want answers to. And if they have the answer and it's a legitimate answer and it's something that we can look into, then I'll accept. But if it's not, then I'm not going to just accept your belief. And that's what people want. I think people get mad at me because I don't accept their beliefs. Um, that's cool. Yeah, so I got a couple things that I'm doing in the background, so I'm gonna get this other video rolling. I got a couple more videos, intro videos that I play. I want to post a link to a few more people. Um, yeah, so give me 1 second, y'all. Give me 1 second. Right. So here go another video that I wanted to play. Um, I don't know if I should though. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and play it. And what's crazy, I'm going to be stopping this video in between because he's going to say some things that I've said. All right. So,
Write smarter, publish faster. Start.
Welcome to Godless and Grounded. The book of Genesis begins with a grand claim. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. A simple sentence that billions take as the foundation of all existence. But when you start reading Genesis 1 without the lens of faith, something becomes very clear. The story doesn't describe the beginning of the universe. It describes the beginning of human imagination trying to explain what it doesn't understand. Let's start at verse 1. It says, God created the heavens and the earth. But immediately in verse 2, the earth is already there, formless and void, with darkness upon the face of the deep. So before creation even begins, there's already an earth, water, and darkness, says. Created from what? The writer never says. The very first two sentences already contradict the idea of creation, from nothing. Ancient people didn't know about atoms or cosmic background radiation or star formation. Their world was limited to what they could see. Sky above, water below, land in between. Genesis 1 reflects exactly that primitive worldview. It wasn't divine knowledge, it was Bronze Age guesswork. Then comes, let there be light. And light appears. But wait, the sun, moon, and stars are not created until the fourth day. So what exactly was that first light? How can there be a day or night without the sun? The author divides light from darkness before creating the source of both. It's like turning on a lamp that doesn't exist yet. Believers often say, that light was God's glory, but the text doesn't say that. It says light existed, was divided from darkness and called day and night, terms that only make sense with a rotating earth relative to a sun. The concept of a 24-hour day is meaningless without a sun. So the first 3 days of creation literally could not happen. The universe was created on a cosmic timetable based on a solar cycle that didn't exist yet.
In just the last 7 days, 8,368 men have clicked the link on one of our ads that you've probably seen on the internet.
This tells us something important. Genesis 1 wasn't written by scientists. It was written by people trying to explain the world they saw every morning. The rising sun, the changing sky, the rhythm of day and night. They projected a human calendar onto the cosmos because they didn't know any better. Then we read that God separated the waters above from the waters below by creating a firmament, a solid dome over the earth. The Hebrew word rakia literally means an expanse hammered out like metal. Ancient people thought the sky was a hard surface holding back celestial water. When it rained, they believed the windows of heaven opened. This same image appears again in Genesis 7 during the flood. In other words, the author believed there was a physical ceiling above us with a cosmic ocean on top. Now, we know this is false. We have sent satellites, space
Why you stop the video, hater? You ain't gonna talk to me, hater? A atheist hater. A uneducated atheistic hater who be talking all that shit to Yasha being. Where you at? Unmute your mic, coward. Unmute your mic, sissy.
Yo, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Let me find that video. I wonder if I put it in somebody else's chat. I think I did. Let me see. You know, I was just playing a video. Yo, people think I'm playing games because I didn't know my mic was muted. Like I've been talking to myself the whole time. I thought I've been talking to the chat. I've been talking to myself. There it is. I found it. I found the video.
Have you ever wanted to see your home from space? With this free satellite Earth Maps tool, you can zoom right down to your. Listen to them. Check.
Yep, I found it. I found the video, y'all. My bad. So here go the video from Myth Vision and Dr. Carrier. All right. Let's go. For all those that say the book of Paul is and all that want to talk that shit about Paul, here you
What if you
go.
can create your own
Here
website by
you go.
saying, this is what I want?
We're going to
With
test y'all
Wix,
to
you
study
can.
and learn.
All right, we look like we're live here at Myth Vision Podcast. We're talking about the book of Acts with a historian, scholar who's published extensively on the field of New Testament studies and other areas as well. I hope everybody's having a wonderful day. Is Acts fake history? What is going on here? Should we trust it to be historically reliable? And if it is reliable in some ways, why is that? Where did this information come from? Does this person have a propagandistic game to play to convince the reader, maybe Theophilus, of their particular belief system or their Christ movement? What are they doing? What's going on? And so I have a scholar, Dr. Richard Carrier, joining us today, who's actually wrote an article recently. I've been going through it again. How we know Acts is a fake history. Welcome back to Myth Vision, Dr. Carrier.
Yeah, glad to be back on.
Just, I guess, if you were to put, because I almost want to read your bio, but you have several books. You have your website, which is where this article is for people who are interested. I mean, I've got, Jesus from Outer Space, Proving History, and then Hitler, Homer, Bible, Christ right here. And I was trying to find your others, but I literally can't see.
Yeah,
there's so many books.
There's 9. I now have 9 books. All but one are available in Audible as well, so people who want to hear them instead of read them. The 9th one, Audible, is coming, but it won't be read by me. It's going to be read by a special celebrity. So that will be announced, I hope, by the end of this year, I think. So finally have the audio of Jesus from Outer Space available. Other than that, yeah, electronic edition and all that. But my website, richardcarey.info, people can go there, find my Twitter feed, my Facebook feed, all my books, all my writings, and links to learn about my courses. So I have a variety of text-based courses, but I'm also starting to roll out courses with Myth Vision, which are video-based courses. And they're great. Like I love the way we've organized those courses. The video is good. The syllabi are good. So the one we've got is New Testament Studies for Everyone, which does touch on this issue of the Book of Acts. And then how would you approach scholarship about it? Like, how would you approach this question that we're talking about today from an informed perspective without having to go get a college degree and all of that?
Right.
And that's what the New Testament Studies for Everyone is about. It's about giving people some of those basic skills, teaching you some of the resources that are available that you can use to leverage your ability and your knowledge, and just fill you in on what is the mainstream position, where is the field on these things right now. And I think that generally the trend on Acts is with me on this. I was just reading, in fact, maybe I can read it out again, but in my article, the one that you linked to, I linked to the Westar Institute's summary of their study, because they came out with a study of Acts. They published a book on it.
Okay.
And it lists all of their conclusions. And I think that came out, I can't remember when that came out. Oh, it was, let's see. It concluded in 2011. I can't remember when they published.
So yeah, there was something that I think people will overlook about this video, and he just said it about the Book of Acts. The scholarship is trending towards him. That is fictional. The Book of Acts is fiction. This is what the scholars are saying, Bart Ehrman and all the other ones. All right, I'm going back to the video.
The book, but just looking back over their list of things that they found, and the Westar Institute, is, people recognize it as the Jesus Seminar. That's a misnomer, because the Jesus Seminar was just one project that they did and that they finished years and years ago. But the group that does these projects is the Westar Institute, and of which I'm now a fellow of the Institute. And they did a bunch of other studies. Once they finished the Jesus Project, they did the Book of Acts, they did Origins of Christianity and things like that. And they're doing a bunch of other stuff too. But anyway, they did this Acts seminar, and I hadn't read like their report summary in like maybe 10 years, right? Because I used the report and the reports for my book on the historicity of Jesus when I wrote a chapter about this, summarizing a lot of other scholars. And you'll notice I cite tons of scholars, like some of the leading writers of commentaries on Acts are saying the same things that I am about the Book of Acts, that it is essentially historical fiction. It's more on the fiction side than it is on the historical side. It's more of a religious adventure novel, and in fact, it has more in common with religious adventure novels, with actual novels like fiction of the people.
According to the Wester House and other scholars, the Book of Acts is religious fiction, religious adventure novel, a religious adventure tale. What? Y'all better quit playing with me.
period than it does with histories of the period. It looks a lot more like a novel than it does a history. If you've read the histories, and you can really tell the difference between the way they're written and how they're composed and all of that.
This is an interesting point. I hope we can get into some of those details.
Yeah, we will
as we go in, because your article, and I've literally referenced it in the description of the video. So if you're watching this later and it's not live, you can check it out. I'm going to go ahead and post this in the chat just so everybody can at least put the tab on your computer. You're going to want to read this later. I actually contacted Dr. Carrier because I'm actually a subscriber to what he publishes. And this came out, and I had just recently done some of this stuff on Richard Purvo's books. Scratch his reputation. I'm talking about his work. Okay.
Yeah,
and
scholarship.
Wow, what a heck of a book. I mean, he's written several books on Acts. He really knows a thing or two. And so I started reading that, and then came across your article, and I went, this was really well written. One of my favorite parts right at the beginning.
Hi, my name's Paula, and I'm a senior technical specialist with Allsup Employment Services. Allsup Employment Services is a government-approved employment.
Was how Christian apologists, and it's usually apologists doing this, because I know Christian scholars who are Christian, how you want to define that. I tend to say if they claim to be Christian, they're Christian. I don't have this.
Right. Yeah, the whole idea of if you don't believe in Nicene Christianity, you're not a real Christian. That's bogus. Yeah, that's definitely
like Dominic Crossan. You reference him, the power parables. So he, will literally take jabs at Luke Acts as propagandistic and all of that, right?
Yeah.
And I consider him a form of a Christian. He claims to be a form of a Christian. So
I think he's a pastor as well, isn't he? Doesn't he have some ordination? I can't remember.
I know he was a monk.
Had been. Okay, yeah.
Yes, he was a monk. And in fact, he tells me to call him Dom, because when he was, a monk, his name was Dominique. So, or he went by the name Dominique. So he just says, call me Dom.
Yeah.
He takes very clear factual approaches on trying to understand what the material is. What he draws ontologically is a whole different question at the end of the day. But I love what he says.
Right.
And he would be on the same page as you when it comes to Acts. But other Christians who are apologists, who, if this isn't history, I'm going to word it this way. If this book is what you're suggesting, they are in huge trouble. Their entire worldview is in huge trouble.
The conservatives, the fundamentalists. Right. I think, there's forms of liberal Christianity that can survive accepting the Bible is all allegory and myth, and has wisdom messages in it and things like that. God's special way of communicating isn't through rational, objective history, right? So if you completely reinterpret the New Testament, you can rescue a semblance of Christianity. But you're right, the fundamentalists need these things to be true, because if it's not history, if this stuff is being made up, that contaminates the rest of the text, right? So that means then the Gospels are making.
I need y'all to hear why they need the book of Acts to be so historically accurate. That right there is a bomb. If the book of Acts isn't historical, then their whole worldview falls apart. Hey, this is why they fight against me so hard in the book, against the book of Acts, when I bring up the book of Acts. Because if the book of Acts isn't historical, it's over. But I'm going to let him keep talking.
And stuff up, and then what have we got? Right, you go into Paul, and I don't know, everything's kind of wishy-washy. And there, maybe Paul's making up stuff. We don't know. So it has a cascade of problems, and so that's why
Do y'all hear? Do y'all see the domino effect? Now maybe Paul's making up shit. We already know Paul was making up stuff, though. Do y'all see the domino effect? You see how this house of cards just falls apart?
it's all man's on deck, right? This is they have to defend the bulwarks, and Acts is one of them. And of course, the article we're talking about, that premise the discussion on this one particular Christian apologist who very explicitly says what their apologetic mission is, which is that they need to believe that Jesus is God. To do that, they need to prove that the first disciples, the first apostles, believed Jesus was God. And to do that, they need the book of Acts, right, to be a historically reliable text, and not, as most mainstream scholars now conclude, a second century.
Instead of spending up to $50 on generic Viagra, you can get this new 100 milligram max strength
piece of propaganda, right? So, all allegory and myth, and has wisdom messages in it and things like that. God's special way of communicating isn't through rational, objective history, right? So yeah, if you completely reinterpret the New Testament, you can rescue a semblance of Christianity. But you're right, the fundamentalists need these things to be true, because if it's not history, if this stuff is being made up, that contaminates the rest of the text, right? Because they're like, well, that means then the Gospels are making stuff up, and then what have we got, right? You go into Paul, and then I don't know, everything's kind of wishy-washy, and there maybe Paul's making up stuff, we don't know. So it has a cascade of problems, and so this is that premise the discussion on this one particular Christian apologist who very explicitly says what their apologetic mission is, which is that they need to believe that Jesus is God. To do that, they need to prove that the first disciples, the first apostles, believed Jesus was God. And to do that, they need the book of Acts, right, to be a historically reliable text, and not, as most mainstream scholars now conclude, a second century piece of propaganda, right? So yeah, and of course, there's not even an internal logic to the thing I pointed out in the article. Like, actually, Acts never says Jesus is God.
So, in order for their shit to fit, the book of Acts has to be accurate, but it isn't. So, what do they have left? They don't have the Gospels, because the Gospels are anonymous. So what are they left with? The 7 letters of Paul?
That's a mistake that often.
But you also point out, like, he does a straw man and some fallacy, because he assumes it's either he's completely man and man only, or he's all the way God, Trinitarian, and it's like, oh my gosh. Several scholars point out the boundaries, right?
This is a common apologetic move, which is you say either one thing or the other, and then you refute one thing, and therefore it's the other, right? Like, this is a common, like, Christian apologetics is practically built out of this methodology. And this is a good example where he says either Acts says Jesus is God, or Acts says he was not divine at all, he's just an ordinary guy. And it's like, no, and that just most mainstream scholars come to the opposite conclusion, that there's an excluded middle there, which actually is what the earliest documents, Paul and the book of Acts, and frankly, all of the Gospels, even the Gospel of John, we could do a whole thing on that. How I don't think even the Gospel of John is claiming that Jesus is God. But that's more debated. But anyway, the book of Acts isn't, because the view was that Jesus was a divine being, like he was supernatural, he was pre-existent, he was godlike, he had godlike powers assigned to him, he had some of God's authority assigned to him by God, and all of this stuff. But that's not the same thing as being identical to God, right? And so that's what the mainstream view is that was the earliest view. Acts is totally in alignment with that. But once you admit that that's the case, then his whole apologetic argument that it's either all God or nothing divine at all, that argument falls apart, and you're stuck in the middle where he can't get to where he wants to go. And that's why he has to create that false dichotomy to do that.
I don't want to get lost in that, because there's some details about this article that I just want people to read, because I'm really want to get into the data of why is this book not history, factual, it's not propagandistic to try and like force a path. And one of the things you said in the intro of this that I was getting to, that was my favorite part, is how you literally say, like, they have to ignore the 20 other book of acts of various fictions. And this is something that Dr. Richard C. Miller said. And by the way, he loves your work, huge fan. Maybe sometime I can get you and him together on to talk. He pointed this out too. It seems to be something that's happening in my thinking over time.
I've been trying to configure this field for an hour, but this CRM sucks. Maybe it's time to stand up to these slow...
And I'm always learning, is we have this overwhelming weight of data from Christians, self-proclaimed Christians, who are writing what we would clearly say fan fiction. They're creating narratives, having fun, having Jesus be a kid killing another kid to turn into birth, like crazy, cool, fun, interesting novels. And
the disciple John commands bed bugs to march out of his bed. Yeah, there's like
or the giant cross coming out of the. So I say, like, the gist is we want to create narrative around our guy. Whether he existed or not is not the question today. It's simply like, here's our person that we're going to create fiction about. But we get back to these supposed untouchable, sealed by some invisible power that says these books, however, are the real deal.
Right. Yeah.
Everyone else is full of it.
Yeah. It's the ignoring of context. This is another apologetic trap. And the true context is that if you step aside and forget Christian faith claims, like the whole idea of the canon and all of that, and you just look at it like books of Acts were normally fiction, like 10 to 1, right? like more than, no, it's more like 20 to 1. Even if ours is true, then, but it's like the weirdest, rarest exception of this genre of literature among Christians. And when you look at it in that context, you go, well, hold on. Christians are just making up Acts willy-nilly left and right. Why should we believe this one is somehow the only one that was a properly researched history? And that doesn't mean you need to answer that question. And apologists like Boyd will attempt that, right? And then, critics like me will come out and expose the fallacies of what they're attempting to do. When you look at the evidence supports, not only is the prior probability support Acts being fiction, but the evidence within Acts itself, our book of Acts itself, confirms that it's fiction. Like, all the evidence trends towards fiction, not towards history. And that's even apart from the fact that there's another version of our Acts. I don't know if I sort of mention it briefly in that article, but people often don't realize that there is another version of Acts, our Acts, that's like 10 to 20% longer and has a whole bunch of extra stuff in it. But it's otherwise identical apart from minor changes. And that one was just happened to be excluded from the canon for whatever reasons. But that means that, like, people were willing to even add fiction to Acts. So you keep fictionalizing it, like keep altering it to add more and more crazy stuff.
I was reading the Hermeneia by Purvo on Acts, and he points out, I mean, there's so much in there. You can't just casually read that Hermeneia. It's like, it's
I mean, all Hermeneia commentaries are heavy, but they're all excellent. Even when they're by people I don't agree with, they're academically rigorous, and so they are the best commentaries to go to. You don't have to agree with them and everything, but they're invaluable to consult because they've done their work. On every aspect of it.
He brings this up. He says it's like there's different versions of that extended version where it's from like 6 to 7 up to 10%, like larger, and wild stuff appears in that other model that we don't see in our version in our Gospels or in our New Testaments today.
And that centers our context, because we step back and look at the context. We're looking at a different thing than the Christians want you to see, right? They don't want you to see the context. And when you do, they'll come up with a whole bunch of excuses why you should ignore the context, which...
I hope that when y'all watch this video, I hope y'all pay attention to what he's saying, because the majority of scholars on the New Testament and the book of Acts are leaning towards his stance on it, that it's fan fiction. But what I'm contending with and against is people who think it's history. I want y'all to understand the dynamic and the separation that has been made in these conversations on the Bible and ancient study, because it's a clear distinction, clear delineation, as the Abos like to say. But yeah, I'm gonna let them get back to talking.
Which is not what you should do as a historian. You should pay attention to the context and take it seriously.
So let's jab right in. Let's get into these. We'll
Yeah,
get
let me read the list. There's this 10. So at the Westar Institute, they have these 10 things, and they spent 10 years on this. So this is a committee, probably about 100 scholars or more overall. And not just anybody can join. You have to be fully credentialed, and you have to be nominated, and they have to like put you in, accept you as for the fellowship. So these are like serious vetted scholars. Over 10 years, came to a pretty good consensus. Like there's not much dissent among them of these 10 things about the Book of Acts. And so let me read them. I'm just reading them verbatim.
I'm going to make you full screen so everybody can see you.
Okay, yeah. The use of Acts as a source for history has long needed critical assessment. Yes. Acts was written in the early decades of the 2nd century. This is, Christian apologists hate this, but this is the growing consensus now, is that Acts is an early 2nd century text. It was not written in the 1st century. The author of Acts used the letters of Paul as sources. That's important because the author of Acts contradicts the letters of Paul a lot, and now we know it's on purpose.
Hold up. You mean the author of Acts used the letters of Paul? Hold on. What? And this was 100 different scholars. Richard Carrier wasn't one of them. And these other scholars outside of Richard Carrier are also saying that the Book of Acts is fan fiction.
Except for, they say, the letters of Paul, no other historically reliable source can be identified for Acts.
Hold up.
For the Christian parts of Acts. Hold up. Not what you should do as a historian. You should pay attention to the context and take it seriously.
So let's jab right in. Let's get into these. Let
me read the list. There's this 10. So at the Westar Institute, they have these 10 things, and they spent 10 years on this. So this is a committee, probably about 100 scholars or more overall. And not just anybody can join. You have to be fully credentialed, and you have to be nominated, and they have to like put you in, accept you as for the fellowship. So these are like serious vetted scholars. Over 10 years, came to a pretty good consensus. Like there's not much dissent among them of these 10 things about the Book of Acts. And so let me read them. I'm just reading them verbatim.
I'm going to make you full screen so everybody can see you.
Okay, yeah. The use of Acts as a source for history has long needed critical assessment. Yes. Acts was written in the early decades of the 2nd century. This is, Christian apologists hate this, but this is the growing consensus now, is that Acts is an early 2nd century text. It was not written in the 1st century. The author of Acts used the letters of Paul as sources. That's important because the author of Acts contradicts the letters of Paul a lot, and now we know it's on purpose. Except for, they say, the letters of Paul, no other historically reliable source can be identified for Acts, for the Christian parts of Acts, that is. Acts can no longer be considered an independent source for the life and mission of Paul. Contrary to Acts 1-7, Jerusalem was not the birthplace of Christianity. Acts constructs its story on the model of epic and related literature. The author of Acts created names for characters as storytelling devices. Acts constructs its story to fit ideological goals, and Acts is a primary historical source for the 2nd century Christianity, not for 1st century Christianity. So I agree with all those things. Those are all the things that I aim to prove in chapter 9 of On the History of the City of Jesus. I focus more on the fiction.
So this argument about the book of Acts that these pseudo intellectuals are having, that these religionists are having against me. They need to leave that one alone. Yeah, so that list, of 10 things just threw the whole shit in the ocean. The Marianas Trench. You only have 7 historical sources, 7 letters written by Paul that can be attested to, that can be relied on. The book of Acts isn't historical. We know the Gospels aren't historical. What do they have left? What do they have left? If you get rid of those books, you have Judaism. If you get rid of those books, you will have Judaism. You wouldn't have this thing called Christianity. I don't think people catch that. If you don't have the gospel at or people been learning about this dude Jesus said, not from Paul. That's a whole different conversation, though. I'm gonna let them get back to having their discussion.
Aspect, like we can look at story after story after story and we can see the literary basis of them. And once you see the literary basis of them, it doesn't make any sense to believe that this is history.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete
Yeah, and I ain't
Right.
gonna show the whole.
Okay, couple things before we dive into Q&A, and to just want to throw it out there. Come on, Dr. Carrier. I mean, look at the opening of Luke. I mean, it's clearly a history. You're just wanting to sin. You just want to deny God and Christ. Luke tells you in his preface, this is a history, and he's giving you the actual facts, right? And Luke wrote this, right? I mean, you're in total denial. Of course, I'm being silly here. Tackle that big question that even scholars tend to wrestle over about this issue, about the preface of Luke.
Yeah, so the usual apologetic line is, oh, this looks just like a preface to a history book, right? And it does. In fact, it deliberately does, but it conspicuously lacks all the actual things that you would find in history. So it's mimicking history while not actually, right? And I'll give you an example
some of those things as you go along.
Yeah. So to give you an example, so we have lots of prefaces. Historians in their prefaces will usually say who they are. Not always, but usually they'll say who they are. what their sources were. Sometimes they'll mention, they'll name the sources. One of my favorite examples is Arian. Christian apologists love to rag on Arian because he wrote this history of Alexander the Great 500 years later. How could he write a history about Alexander the Great 500 years later? Why would you trust him, you silly historians? And it's like, because Arian says who he is. He says what his method was. He explains what his method was. He names his sources, and he says, I'm only using 3 eyewitness books written by people who marched with Alexander. I'm going to just say what they say where they agree, and where they disagree, I'll point out where they disagree. And we know he doesn't follow that method, consistently, but he does it. Like, there's points where he'll say, oh, well, this author said that there was a magical snake, and this other author said it was just a raven, right? Like, so there'll be things like that. But it'll be this methodological consciousness, but naming sources, naming who they are, explaining to the reader why you should even believe anything they're saying, in rational terms, not faith-based terms. When you look at Luke's preface, he never says who he is, never explains who he is, never explains how he knows anything he knows. He says he's faithfully reproducing a tradition handed down to him, but we know that's not even true, because he contradicts all his prior sources, Matthew and Mark, for example. So he's not faithfully doing it, but he claims to be. But he doesn't name them either. He doesn't say, hey, Mark and Matthew wrote these books. I'm using them as sources, and this is how I'm going to decide between them where they disagree or whatever. He doesn't do that, right? He never names his sources. He never explains what method he used to decide what to write. Why did he contradict them? Why did he make more stuff up? He doesn't tell you. So the preface looks like a history, but it doesn't do any of the actual things that a real history would do. So this is very much kind of like a fictional history. The way it already from the beginning, the way it's constructed does not look like an actual history.
You actually bring up Plutarch's kind of critique of Herodotus, and Herodotus, for his time and age, he does an okay job. I mean, he does not bad. Of course, the father of history.
For his time, yeah.
Yeah, but even while Plutarch jabs at him for kind of the methodological, he crosses over certain barriers and mixes up genres and stuff in the way that he does stuff.
But even Herodotus is better than Acts. Even Herodotus will sometimes name sources. He'll sometimes express skepticism when he's not sure about a story. He'll talk
like
about
Salmachus.
Right. He'll tell alternative versions of the story. And that's a good example where he actually tells you, oh, this version of the story I have from the Greeks who don't like them, and this version of the story I have from them, right? So he's telling you where the biases are. Like, he's doing a critical history here. It's very primitive. It's very simplistic in his critical method, because he's practically the first one doing it. But he's doing more than we get in the Book of Acts. We don't get anything like that in the Book of Acts. So even Herodotus, whom historians like me deem to be as far as reliability goes, even he is like, stars better than the Book of Acts by comparison. We might get into some of the details of, I don't know what you want to get into next, but there's one thing I know, the one thing that Christians always cite to try and contradict what I just said. And we can jump into that if you want.
Go for
it. Which is that he gets trivia correct, right? Luke, the name of a magistrate, the title, the word used in this particular region for magistracy, the geography, his geography is decent. He gets like the correct people who were in charge in certain places at the right times and all of this stuff. So he gets like when he dates John the Baptist's ministry, he lists a bunch of facts, none of which have anything really to do with John the Baptist or Christians, but he lists a bunch of facts and go, oh, look, all those facts. He's dating something. That's what historians did. He's dating something. Curiously, he's not dating anything to do with Jesus. He only dates the reign of John the Baptist. And he does it in a traditional way where he lists all of these things. But this is it. That's the only time he ever dates anything, other than the Quirinius census, which is, that's a datable event. But even what he does with that is ridiculous. But all of this stuff has nothing to do with Christianity, right? This is all incidental color detail. And I cite, and I quote an author and scholar in the article we're talking about, where he says, like, well, I've read detective novels that were 100% accurate in all the trivial details, like the names of politicians and things like that.
We are not a traditional cafe. We're completely unconventional. And my Wix website really has to capture the same magic. Hi, I'm Aaron. I'm the owner of Cuppa Pug. Cuppa Pug was born out of my love for pugs. When I started the business, I had a very clear direction as to where we wanted to go and what we wanted.
And yet we're total fiction, right? So like it's curious that the only time we can confirm anything is accurate in Acts is when it is basically stuff that you get from the ancient version of Wikipedia. And the only time, every time he talks about Christian history, nothing is corroborated. So what you're looking at is you've got a historian here who's making up Christian history and putting it into a skeleton of real history, where none of the Christian stuff is corroborated, but all of the incidental stuff is corroborated because he's getting it from reference works. And I talk about in the article about these were commonly available, like all the reference works that Luke would need to put these references in there without any reference to Christian history, were widely available. It would have been in any library, and almost every major city in ancient Rome at that time, the Roman Empire at that time, had a major library. Libraries were open to the public. You couldn't check out books, but you could use them in your research libraries. You could use them in the library. And one of the biggest ones we know about is Josephus. We know he used Josephus like mad. And used him poorly. That's the other thing, is he's bad at even cribbing from Josephus. He's bad at it. But that's how we know he used him, because how he screws up can only be explained by having screwed up reading Josephus. There's no other plausible explanation for it. So yeah, he's throwing that color detail in to give the veneer of historical reality. But it is conspicuous that all the real history that you actually want to know about, none of that is corroborated, and all of it's implausible. And that's the stuff that's highly literary in its construction and so on. So even the one attempt that apologists will try to make for, Acts is a really reliable history, actually the evidence proves the opposite, is that he's sort of good at doing research in encyclopedias. That's basically all you can show for that. It doesn't mean that he's telling you the truth about any of the other stuff.
I enjoy the book, of course. It's fun. It's interesting. Certain spots of it are more fun to me than others. But so we're talking about sources. We would say Acts has the Gospels, some form, probably all three for all we know. We didn't dive into the Marcion / debate of what's happening there yet. Maybe you can make a comment on this, because there seems to be a big issue between what kind of Acts do we have? Do we trust that Marcion actually had a primitive version and that they fluffed it out and padded and reverse in, or is Marcion taking things out of what was already a thorough book of Acts, Gospel of Luke or whatever, or really Luke, because I'm not sure about the Acts part when it comes to Marcion, but it seems like there's a debate amongst scholars on what the deal is with there. Do you want to make a brief comment on that before I dive into any other material?
Yeah, only to say that I don't have strong opinions in that debate yet. I'm watching the debate. I don't think any side of the debate has a strong case. I think the evidence is too poor.
Right.
But I'm persuadable on that. So I'm sitting around waiting for people to rally around a position. I'm not sure whether Luke Acts is something that Marcion edited, or whether he had the original and other people, the canonical, the creators of the edition that we have, if they're the ones who edited it. And this is complicated by the fact that we have that other version. Yep. And that other version, it's of Luke Acts. So both Luke and Acts are longer. They have weirder things in them.
More,
well, where did those come from?
What I've been saying for years, he's already said it. He's just going into further detail and into how they wrote the book of Acts and why they wrote the book of Acts. But there were some challengers who had some things they disagree with me on. So that's why I did this. But see, here go the question that I asked him. All right. Yeah, this dude talking shit. He's just talking shit. It's nothing intelligent coming from him. It's just all shit talking. So there go the question that I asked. Right there. That's the question. For those that say this religion is African, why didn't Paul write one epistle to any African country? Now, all he's been doing is Just throw it in so. He hasn't he tried to say Paul was the Egyptian, uh wrong Africa didn't exist. He was all over the place. He was all over the place. Um but this is for the people who did that fallacious ass video talking about African Christianity before the European. Africans had Christianity before the European. So that's why I asked that question. If they have the answers, then I would have seen it. But apparently they don't have the answers. So I'm going to do another thing. I'm going to show some of the books that I've been reading. All right. And this is a book that I just got today. I was lucky to find this. This is a hard PDF to actually find. It's a very difficult PDF to find. But I found it. And y'all know I don't mind letting it read itself so we can go through it. I would share the book like I do. Here it is. And I let it read itself.
This is a groundbreaking study of the literary antecedents for the resurrection stories in the Gospels, with wide-ranging implications for Christian history and theology. Never again can the resurrection stories be read and interpreted apart from their ancient literary context. Dennis Smith, Phillips Theological Seminary. Early Christianity emerged in a world of intense interaction among the devotees of different cults and religions. Narratives, images, ritual practices, and ideas continu ally cross the boundaries of religious groups. With the interdependence of ancient religions as a starting point, Richard Miller shows the close relation of the early narratives of Jesus' resurrection with pre-existing pagan and Jewish narratives of divine translation. This study makes a significant contribution to the study of early Christianity and the religious trends of the Roman Empire. Angelos Chaniotis, Professor of Ancient History, Institute for Advanced Study, Princeton, New Jersey, USA. Richard Miller's reading of ancient Greco-Roman narratives concerning the disappearance of heroes and demigods successfully challenges the traditional reconstruct tie-ins of the formation of resurrection accounts in the Gospels. Miller moves with theoretical sophistication through an impressive array of ancient texts and shows how early Christian stories about Jesus were developed in the context of literary imitation and emulation that characterized the Mediterranean world in antiquity. Giovanni Bazzana, Harvard Divinity School, USA. This book offers an original interpretation of the origin and early reception of the most fundamental claim of Christianity, Jesus' resurrection. Richard Miller contends that the earliest Christians would not have considered the New Testament accounts of Jesus' resurrection to be literal or historical, but instead would have recognized this narrative as an instance of the trope of divine translation, common within the Hellenistic and Roman mythic traditions.
Damn.
Given this framework, Miller argues, early Christians would have understood the resurrection story as fictitious rather than historical in nature.
Fictitious.
By drawing connections between the Gospels and
fictitious.
ancient Greek and Roman literature, Miller makes the case that the narratives of the resurrection and ascension of Christ applied extensive and unmistakable structural and symbolic language common to Mediterranean translation fables, stock story patterns derived particularly from the archetypal myths of Heracles and Romulus. In the course of his argument, the author applies a critical lens to the referential and mimetic nature of the gospel stories and suggests that adapting the translation fable Trope 2 accounts of Jesus' resurrection functioned to exalt him to the level of the heroes, demigods, and emperors of the Hellenistic and Roman world. Miller's contentions have significant implications for New Testament scholarship and will provoke discussion among scholars of early Christianity and classical studies.
All right, these are just some reviews that is going through. I'm gonna get down to chapter 1. All right, because here go to chapter breakdown. Here go to chapters. Yeah, this the whole book too. All right, let's get to Justin's confession.
One Justin's confession. O hashtag TI ta backslash O hashtag Moya toy equals J4 LC Lu slash Gontage MO slash NOI Misu slash Mecca. Although we say the same things as the Greeks, we alone are hated. Justin, 1 A Paul. 24.1. CA 150C. In response to a most grievous and escalating persecution of Christians under Roman Emperor Antoninus Pius, the earliest surviving written apology, i.e., sustained rhetorical defense, of Christianity confessed. TW de Kai backslash to backslash N low slash gone, O backslash E4 st PRW 0 ton G slash Enma 2 key.
That's Greek.
Justin, 1 A Paul. 21. When we affirm that the Logos, God's phi RST born, begotten without a sexual union, namely, our teacher Jesus Christ, was crucified, died, rose, and ascended to heaven, we are conveying nothing new with respect to those whom you call the sons of Zeus, Hermes, the interpreting word and teacher of all, Asclepius, who, though he was a great healer, was struck by a thunderbolt and so ascended to heaven, and Dionysus too, after he had been torn limb from limb, and Heracles, once he had commit himself to the FL aims to escape his toils, and the sons of Leda, and 2 Justin's confession. The Dioscuri, and Perseus, son of Danae, and Bellerophon, who, though sprung from mortals, rose to heaven on the horse Pegasus. For what shall I say of Ariadne, and those like her who have been declared to be set among the stars? And what about the emperors who die among you, whom you deem worthy to be forever immortalized, and for whom you bring forward someone who swears to have seen Caesar, once having been consumed by fiery ascend into heaven from the funeral pyre? 1. Justin Martyr's One Apology presented the framing contours of the gospel narrative as having resided within a mythic mode of hero fabulation. Considering the plea's broader context, one may best summarize the larger argument as follows. We, O Romans, have produced myths and fables with our Jesus, as you have done with your own heroes and emperors. So why are you killing us? Central to the earliest great apology of the Christian tradition, this grand concession casts a profound light on the nature of early Christian narrative production. To this synopsis of the text, however, begs further complication and clarify ca tie-in and, as such, shall serve as the heuristic stone pathway for embarking upon the present study. The critic may pause to consider, could the apology indeed have admitted that the earliest Christians had composed Jesus' divine birth, dramatically tragic death, resurrection, and ascension within the early Christian gospel tradition as fictive embellishments following the stock structural conventions of Greek and Roman mythology specify cali the narrative traditions of the fabled antique Mediterranean demigod? Would not such an admission have utterly crippled earliest Christian charisma, at least as historians have typically imagined the so-called Orthodox movement's claim in the phi RST 2 centuries of the Common Era? The text becomes all the more disturbing when considering that the argument did not even qualify as an admission per se, but merely arose as a statement in passing, as though commonly acknowledged both within and without Christian society. Indeed, the implied author even included himself, as well as all Christians, as complicit in this mythopoeic enterprise. OU para 2/J par UMI 9N legami slash nuge TW equals UU, JDI /Kino /NTI Fe Roman %. 3. Did this earliest defense of Christianity deliver a candid assessment when stating that there was nothing unique or sui generis about these dominant framing contours of the Jesus narrative? The apology's at times overt rejection of antecedent iconic figures of class cycle antiquity, however, yet further complicates the matter. In 1 Apology 5, for instance, the apology asserted that the classical pantheon was, in truth, a caste of demons. Notice that the apology did not argue this point. The denigration did not arise out of a reasoned progression of thought. The text simply asserted that the gods were to be understood as wicked and impious. Only out of ignorance did the classical world regard such demons as deities. For so, despite the confession that the early Christians say the same things as the Greeks, 1 Paul.24.1, the Greek analogues, according to the defense, arose by the inspiration of evil demons through the myth-making of the Justin's Confession. Confession 3. Poets, 1 Paul.23.3. By thus discrediting the prior Greek literary renditions of the sons of Zeus as deceptions, the apology distinguished the analogous Christian narratives regarding Jesus alone as being true, though again providing no further evidence or reasoned argumentation. Marshalling an all the more radical ambivalence than those sentiments previously articulated by the Epicurean Lucretius in his De Rerum Natura, the apology's claim appears to be unstable, pendulating between two paradoxical propositions. 5. On the one hand, the stock themes of the tales of the Greek demigods equal those applied to his Christian demigod, thus indicating conventional adaptation. While on the other hand, all such prior Greek stories were mere deceptions arising out of the corrupt influence of demons upon the classical poets. The gospel narrative alone warrants credibility. If one mistakenly holds the early Christian apologetic tradition to the generally accepted standards of reasoned argumentation in this aporetic moment, the apology's thesis collapses, undercutting itself. The derrida within may find amusement in watching Justin's text deconstruct with such alacrity. This observed lack of coherence, however, instead emerged from the apology's fluid, non-systemic rhetorical style. As Robert Price has observed, it is to the history of Christian rhetoric rather than of Christian doctrine that Justin and the other Greek apologists belong. 6. As with his Christian movement, Justin's position was in motion, that is, echoing a shift upon a developmental trajectory of early Christian rhetoric in contestation with the cultural structures of classical civilization. This refraction in the works of Justin of a chronological strategic development becomes the more visible when one notes the several intermediate, hybridic, tertium quid, positions and tactics throughout 1 to 2 apology. The works, for instance, as did the Johannine school, sought to appropriate the Greek philosophical conception of universal reason, (Gauge), as metaphysically establishing the underlying wisdom and machinations of the cosmos, thus having seen this principle as fully embodied by and culminating in the Christ. Socrates not only knew this divine reason, but by extension, according to the Apology, knew Christ himself. 2 Paul.10.8. One Apology, moreover, boldly asserted that all who lived according to universal reason, (Gauge), prior to Christ were in fact Christians, listing such examples as Socrates and Heraclitus among the Greeks. 1 Paul.46.3. 4. Gaius Musonius Rufus, the Roman Stoic philosopher. 2 Paul.8.1. 3. And Abraham, Ananias, Azarias, Misael, Elijah, and many others from among the barbarians 1 Paul 46.3-4. As previously understood in Greek philosophical tradition, this supreme reason existed as universally accessible to all peoples throughout time. The Apology merely made explicit that which the prologue to John's Gospel had already implied, JN 1.1-14. Contrary to Adolf von Harnack's conception, Justin did not attempt to Hellenize the alleged original Judeo-Christian kernel of Christianity, umlagert nach den Kern. 7. Setting aside the matter of the historical Jesus, one may observe that the New Testament documents previously displayed the inchoate, thoroughly Hellenistic disposition of. For Justin's confession. Early Christian proclamation. Justin's works were not Hellenizing, but providing rhetorical exposition of the already well-established Hellenistic hybridity of earliest Christian kerygma. Indeed, the present book succeeds inasmuch as the analysis demonstrates the Apology's claim that the Gospel renditions of Jesus presented new, with respect to the stock themes of the classical demigod tradition of Mediterranean.
So when I make the claims about the Bible, it's not just because oh shit. So again, that's just one of the books that I'm reading that I got. Here go another one. Y'all know I don't mind showing y'all my library. Um, I think this is one I've sent people copies of. I think people should get this one too. I actually read some of it. I might have this read by AI also one day. It's a lot. It's 678 pages, this book. So Jacob L. Wright had a lot to say in his book. All right. So let me share my screen. Y'all know I'm not capping. Let's see what he has to say.
Imperialism and the Discovery of the Orient. Interpretation of the Bible has continued, without interruption, for more than 2 millennia, yet our understanding of its origins and teachings has dramatically expanded in recent times thanks to remarkable discoveries. Over the past century, methods of archaeological research have reached impressive levels of sophistication, And excavation teams working at scores of sites throughout the Middle East continue to unearth all kinds of evidence for the communities that produced the Bible, their ways of
life, their mechanisms for coping with crises, and the historical events that shaped their destinies. Western interest in Eastern antiquity originally had very little to do with the imperialism and the discovery of the Orient. Interpretation of the Bible has continued, without interruption, for more than 2 millennia, yet our understanding of its origins and teachings has dramatically expanded in recent times thanks to remarkable discoveries. Over the past century, methods of archaeological research have reached impressive levels of sophistication, and excavation teams working at scores of sites throughout the Middle East continue to unearth all kinds of evidence for the communities that produced the Bible, their ways of life, their mechanisms for coping with crises, and the historical events that shaped their destinies. Western interest in Eastern antiquity originally had very little to do with the Bible and a lot to do with imperial politics. In 1798, a French general named Napoleon Bonaparte and his Army of the Orient set sail for Egypt, with the goal of annexing the country and establishing a French presence in the region. Napoleon brought with him 167 scientists and scholars of all sorts and stripes. They mapped and sketched all they saw. They also collected and deported many objects back to Europe, and these artifacts of ancient empires had struck Emperor of the French. French. The most important object deported from Egypt was an otherwise unremarkable stele inscribed with a decree from Ptolemy V in 196 BCE. Today we know it as the Rosetta Stone. The imperial powers of Europe fought over rights to this text because it held a key that unlocked ancient secrets. The inscription is rendered not only in Greek, but also in Demotic script and Egyptian hieroglyphs, and therefore scholars could use this trilingual to decipher the language of the dynasties that had ruled Egypt for millennia. Thanks to the Rosetta Stone, and the painstaking efforts of philologists, we can read the many writings that line the walls of Egyptian temples and palaces, as well as the precious caches of ancient papyri preserved by the arid North African climate. Napoleon's voyages throughout the Middle East ignited Europe's imagination for years to come. Among the many colorful personalities of the following generation was an ambitious Englishman named Austen Henry Layard, 1817 to 1894. Born in Paris, Layard grew up in Italy and began his travels in West Asia by the age of 22. His original intention was to travel overland to Sri Lanka, but he eventually ended up in Mosul near the ancient site of Kuyunjik. Others had already been excavating at this site before his arrival, and as their finds were beginning to attract public attention, Layard was eager to stake a claim and make a name for himself. Beginning in 1845, he dug at both this site and nearby Nimrud, and within just 2 years, he managed to make astonishing progress. Not least, he was able to identify Kuyunjik as the city of Nineveh, the capital of the formidable Assyrian Empire that conquered the Kingdom of Israel in 722 BCE. When Layard returned to England a couple years later, he promptly published a 2-volume, highly romanticized, account of his voyages and discoveries, Nineveh and its Remains, 1848 to 1849, which made him a household name. As one of the finest exemplars of English travel literature, the work begins. A deep mystery hangs over Assyria, Babylonia, and Chaldea. With these names are linked great nations and great cities dimly shadowed forth in history, mighty ruins, in the midst of deserts, define, by their very desolation and lack of definite form, the description of the traveler, the remnants of mighty races still roving over the land, the fulfilling and fulfillment of prophecies, the plains to which the Jew and the Gentile alike look as the cradle of their race. After a journey in Syria, the thoughts naturally turn eastward, and without treading on the remains of Nineveh and Babylon, our pilgrimage is incomplete. With a pronounced penchant for self-promotion, and thanks to his own superb sketches of the finds that he published in a spectacular folio volume, The Monument of Nineveh, from drawings made on the spot, 1849, Layard was able to return to the region as an attaché of the British Embassy. His excavations at Nineveh during this second excursion laid bare the remains of monumental palaces whose gates were guarded by massive sphinxes and whose walls were lined with stunning reliefs featuring a wide spectrum of scenes, figure 0.1. Some depict lion hunting, others portray siege and deportation, but all celebrate the might of the Great Assyrian Empire. Layard shipped off the most impressive reliefs and statues to London. The British Museum displayed these exiled artifacts not only for the personal enjoyment of the thousands who visited the exhibits each week, but also for the political message they communicated to France and other colonialist competitors. Queen Victoria and the British Empire had discovered, and now possessed, the remains of what her historians billed as the world's first empire. The sensational tidings took England by storm, and many eagerly awaited the daily reports, along with the drawings of the phenomenal finds that appeared in newspapers. Figure
All right, so
0.2.
yeah, I'll stop this here. All right, so yeah, this is another book that I think y'all should get. And one more. You know what? I'm gonna get up out of here. I thought I was gonna have some contention. I thought some pseudos was gonna pull up. Apparently he mad that my mic was muted, but I didn't hear him say anything when he joined. His mic was muted also. So, hey. But yeah, I'm gonna get up out of here. Peace.